My name is Heather Chia. I was born Heather Sweeting in Sydney to parents on a farm between Young and Grenfell. I'm 66 years old. I have 4 children. I'm married to a Chinese gentleman from northern China who immigrated here when he left China during the war when he was 4, and he came to Australia when he was 9. And this is my story. I'm now going to subject you to it.
Tell me about the era that you were born into and about your parents and your siblings.
I was born in 1950 to farming parents just after the war, so it's a post-war boom, especially for my father, who was a sheep grazier. So wool was the income of the day at that time, and everything was going. I was very fortunate.
And that was fairly typical of other families in the area or in the country?
It was, yeah, it was fairly, I can remember prosperity. I didn't, like my older siblings, they were born during the Second World War, and they would have gone through a lot tougher times as little kids because Mum and Dad were on coupons to get provisions for their food. But Dad was very resourceful, and so was Mum, in growing vegetables, growing crops that they could swap with other families for other things. Some families raised turkeys. We had lamb, so when he got sick of turkey sandwiches, when my friend got sick of turkey sandwiches at school, I'd swap her for turkey, she'd have the lamb, etc. Things like that. It was fun. I grew up in a very fortunate time.
Where were you born?
I was born in Sydney, Crown Street Women's Hospital, because my older sibling had passed away at 2 days old through the Rh negative factor, which wasn't understood in 1948 when he was born. Then taken back home to the farm between Young and Grenfell to be raised. Only in Sydney, as I said, was I born because of the health issues. And I'm alive today because of Crown Street Women's Hospital, which doesn't any longer exist, but used to be in Surrey Hills.
So if your mother had lost a baby, what year was that your older brother passed away?
1948.
So how did they deal with something like that happening to a woman in hospital compared to how they might deal with it today?
In some hospitals it wouldn't be much different, I imagine. Most good hospitals in Sydney would have dealt with it in the way of these days, the knowledge that they have regarding the antibodies reacting at birth and so forth. The knowledge for that is now much greater, as one of my daughters has married a man with A positive blood. She's negative, so they had to have an injection before they had their children. So the knowledge is extreme now.
And what do you think was expected of a woman? What was the accepted grief process after a woman lost a child all that time ago?
In 1948 there were nil support, really. My mother was an only child because her mother had lost 4 babies. Some were full term and some were stillborn. So Mum ended up being an only child, and she had through her life 2 very, very good friends, one of whom was a nursing sister. So she had those 2 friends by phone, but she grieved, I would say, nearly all her life. It wasn't understood. Grief wasn't spoken of, especially when you lost a baby. It was just, you never got to hold the baby. The baby was whisked away. Mum and Dad would visit the gravesite, and I was a little kid in the back seat of the car and told to stay put. But recently, a couple of years ago, my husband and I took a journey back to Young, where that child was buried, in an unmarked grave, and I was able to say a few words to my brother. I only found the grave being unmarked. I knew it had to be in either a Presbyterian section or a Salvation Army section, because Dad was a very staunch Presbyterian. And we found a little plot in the Young Cemetery that had a very similar edging on it to what he had done for his mother-in-law at the country farm. So we were pretty sure there was only one other unmarked one, and that was in the Catholic cemetery. And Dad held fairly bigoted responses to the Catholic faith, and I've learnt not to be like that. But I knew that Ross wouldn't have been buried in the Catholic section. You can edit that if you want.
Okay. So we'll go back as far as you can remember, memories of your paternal grandfather, while we're on the subject of your dad and his religious beliefs and background. What do you remember of your paternal granddad? You had him until you were how old?
11. He was avid horseman. He was also his father was a railway engineer in England, and they would have been responsible for a lot of those early train engineer jobs. I don't know whether it was on the lines, but I think it was on the engines that they built. So that was my great-grandfather's background in England. They came to Melbourne. So then my grandfather was with them, and then came up to Corribla, which is near Narrandera and Leeton in the Murrumbidgee irrigation area. And that's when I suppose my grandfather had a chance to love horses, and he became a winner at the Royal Easter Show in those early days. And I'm not sure of the years, but he, according to my older sister, who was also a lover of horses, he taught her to ride. He taught me to ride. I believe that's where he would have got it from the lots of space out at Leeton, Narrandera and so forth. And my dad attended Yanco Agricultural College, which is near Narrandera. There somewhere. I haven't been there for years, but it's out there somewhere. And Dad left school in 5th class and then became the greatest designer of machinery and an incredible man. And all of my 4 children are designers in their own way, and they get it from him and they do not get it from me.
How does our family come to be in Australia at all? I mean, we're not Indigenous, are we? So we're still really essentially from migrant stock, aren't we? How do we come from?
Well, my grandfather and his father, they were Presbyterians in a very Catholic part of Ireland, and they felt very out of it. So they moved from there to Scotland, apparently, and then from there to Melbourne, originally to Melbourne.
Okay.
And then when my grandfather came in from Corribla, he settled on a farm outside of Grenfell with his parents, and then married apparently a lovely lady called Ellen May Bowman, and I'm not sure of the middle bit. My older siblings know the middle story of that, but then Dad, when he was old enough, got his own plot of land between Young and Grenfell, 20 miles from Young and 14 miles from Grenfell.
And
started that as virgin land, 2,000 acres.
That wasn't in any part a grant. Was that an outright purchase?
Purchase.
Right.
Hard yakka. He lived on Uncle Toby's porridge 3 times a day until he found a wife that had enough of that, so he went and found a good cook, and he did well. She was beautiful.
Yeah.
My mother was beautiful.
What was life like growing up in early childhood up till 10 years old?
Fantastic. I rode my bike, I dodged the brown snakes. The others were all interested in other things by then, because there are 5 years difference between me and my next brother, because the middle one had passed away at birth at 2 days old. So they all had their interests.
What were they?
And
what does a teenager do that doesn't have internet?
Internet? Oh, gosh. Internet's a curse.
What did you do in the 50s if you were bored?
You ride a bike, you get on the old 18-year-old horse that I had until he was 26, and you take your life in your hands and you go for a ride on the thing. And my grandfather and my father used to say the only way she's going to get hurt on that old horse is if he drops dead and falls on her. Because to get him started, you would have to get the pepper stick, a long pepper stick, because I didn't have all the gear my sister had, because by then my grandfather had passed away. But he was being a horseman, he could make his own whip, he could make his own everything. Not a whip for the horse, but he was a leather worker as well. He was a very clever man, my grandfather. And I used to ride the horse, sit out on the big old granite rock in the back paddock and have a chat to my horse. You just have time to daydream. You don't have I didn't have a transistor radio till Dad's friend brought that back from a visit to Hong Kong. When I was about 15, I was allowed to have a transistor radio in my room, as long as it wasn't on when I had homework. It had to be turned off, and Mum used to check that I had it turned off. And then by the time I was about 16, I convinced her that I liked music in the background to do my homework. So she had me taught music from the age of 8. My sister taught me from the age of 4. We used to do duets when she came home from boarding school. And that instilled in me a love of music, which started when I wasn't even 4, I think it was about 3.5 from memory. So that's sort of, I'm wandering off the subject again. But
No. This is good.
And then
Let me just interrupt for a moment.
Yeah.
Tell me about other kinds of pets you had.
Oh, I had lots of beautiful pets. I still, now, in my 60s, love the idea of the fact that Dad used to bring me home baby lambs when their mothers had been killed by foxes or crows, and they had to be raised, and Mum had a tomato sauce bottle with a teat on the end. You used to be able to buy them in the produce store, and then you fill them up with warm milk and you feed the lambs, and some of them didn't make it. Most of them did, and one in particular was a huge Border Leicester cross, and he would still come out of the flock long after I left home to be married.
The ram didn't get married. It was
you that got married.
Yep.
Yeah, the ram was often married, but he came out of the flock for years after to greet my dad when he went round the sheep, and Dad could never take him to the sale to be slaughtered for meat. He just always kept him until he died. Then I had baby kangaroos brought home because the man used to go shooting for rabbits, and occasionally they would hit a mother kangaroo by mistake. And the joey was found in the grass, and they'd bring it home, and I had one particular kangaroo for nearly 5 years, and she died of pneumonia. They don't like being raised by hand. They can't take cow's milk because it makes them blind, but I was lucky mine didn't go blind, but she was just naughty and kept running off, but she'd generally come home again if you called her. But that was a lot of fun. Those years were good years, and that was my entertainment. When the boys got girlfriends, and Roma was at boarding school a lot. Then Roma got married quite young. So then I was on my own with my parents for quite a number of years. And they were good years. You learn to entertain yourself. And then I had my piano. I loved my piano. And if I was grieving or happy or sad or whatever, I'd get on the piano and give it heaps.
What do you feel was expected of you as you entered teen years and had to start thinking about what the rest of your life was going to be like? Did you have a plan?
Didn't have a plan. No, I'm still wondering what I'll be when I grow up. But at the time, you're expected to meet certain standards. You had to behave yourself. You had to respect your parents. You had to respect all elders. All your parents' friends they had to be respected. You weren't to discuss how you thought they dressed or how you thought they spoke or what they ate. You had to just be quiet. It was children were better seen but not heard sometimes. My parents were very strict, but they were extremely loving. So I learnt that balance from a very early age. You also respected the ministry of your church if you were a follower of Christian belief, which Mum and Dad were. I think Dad liked the social side of it, but Mum was a committed, good woman, Christian. And you respected your doctor and your teacher. And even when I got the cane in 5th class from my one teacher school, Mum and Dad never ever questioned that discipline. They just said to the teacher, "Go for it, Tom. She's misrepresented what we believe in, so you give her the discipline she needs." And I got 2 cuts of the cane.
What for? What'd you do?
Oh, don't. Do I have to say that? Oh.
You have to.
I've always been a bit of a romantic. So my teacher in a one-teacher school in the country was a Warunga school on the Young Road, Grenfell, on its own on an acre of land. He had 17 pupils from kindy to 6th class, and he was most influence of any teacher I've ever had in my life. I still think of him every day. But I wanted him to be married to the woman of his dreams. And she was Presbyterian and he was a Catholic. And Young and Grenfell in those days were very specific about you were either Protestant or you were a Catholic, and it's really, really sad to me.
Was it just that area, or do you think it was...
Young was bad.
Oh, okay.
Don't send this to Young. But they're good now. My brother sorted them out.
Young's an incredibly diverse place now,
yes,
anyway.
Yeah.
So they've learned from it, maybe.
But anyway, getting back to the cane.
Yeah.
I thought I was anonymously writing this note this one day because I finished my homework. I finished my schoolwork a bit ahead of the others this one particular day, and I thought I'd just make this note and leave it on the desk, the teacher's desk. And of course he wasn't going to know who the writing was. He had 17 pupils. He was too busy. So I wrote a note saying, "Tom needs to marry Betty. They are so much in love. I want them to get married."
So it wasn't even a false letter from Betty. It was
No, it was me saying what they should do with their lives.
I see.
And I was 10.
Oh.
So then the thing was with that note, in those days I used to dot my capital I's. And in that note there were a few capital I's with dots on them. And Tom, of course, knew straight away who'd written it, but he made everybody stand up, and he knew he'd make me feel bad if he kept everybody in at lunch.
He wanted you to.
He never did. He wanted me to feel bad, and in doing that, he was so clever at what he did that I owned up.
Yeah.
And I promptly got 2 cuts of the cane on my hand in front of the whole class, which I've never forgotten, and I think I've been a good girl ever since.
Next up, high school. Where'd you go to high school?
Went to school at Grenfell High School, as it was known then. It was later renamed Henry Lawson High School because we had a very fast-moving principal come in when I was in about year 9.
Hang on, what's the Henry Lawson connection, just briefly?
Henry Lawson, the poet, was born in Grenfell, just down. There's an obelisk there now that's still there, just near where we used to play sport on a Wednesday afternoon.
Okay.
And it was a school of, we had 96 in year 7. I was in the second year of the program, which made high school from 7 to 12 instead of first year to 5th year. So in my family I was the first to do I can't remember the name of the scheme now, but it was changed to 6 years of high school.
They have 96 kids in year 7. That's actually quite big.
It was a big, yeah. Remember, with my particular age group, there were a lot of children born after the war.
Why's that?
Because everything was they could see new hope, new faith in the future, prosperity in the wool industry, which was very big at Grenfell, wool and wheat, and my dad grew oats. So he did that on the side to raise money to send the 3 older ones to boarding school. because Grenfell High School didn't go to fifth form in those days. That only went to the intermediate, they called it, which is the end of year 9. So everyone had to either go away to school or start work. If your parents couldn't afford to send you away, and Dad worked very hard to afford to send Peter and Bill and Roma away to school, for boarding school.
You did well in high school, didn't you?
I always liked being, I liked my books, I liked drawing margins and having pens, and that led to a later life in being a secretary. I always have liked
Order,
but my room was very messy till I was about 22.
Was it socially okay to do well at school?
Absolutely, yeah. You were a bit of a jerk if you, even in the 60s, 70s, if anyone mentioned marijuana or whatever, you were a loser in those days. Because there was so much fresh air and so much fun to be had. And we had, I think the thing with my family is Dad would have New Year's Eve parties at home because he'd built a great big home. Every time Mum had another baby, he'd put another room on. So he used to hold New Year's Eve parties on the front veranda. It's where Joe and I were married, on the front veranda. The reception was on the front veranda of the family home. It was just beautiful. So he, that was just Dad. He was a great bloke. But high school, a co-ed high school, in my view, is the only way to go. It's just, you get used to the opposite sex being there all the time. You're not going, as soon as you leave school, you're sort of wondering what the heck to do. You've mixed with boys, or if you're a boy, you've mixed with girls. And they have such different opinions too. A teenage boy's got a different opinion about everything to what a teenage girl, and that's all in the playground. So it was great. It was a great school led by very strong leaders. The teachers were hardworking. There was only one secretary.
There's always one though, isn't there?
There's always one, yeah. The last 25 years you find out there's always one. But no, a great school.
In 1966, you set off on a wonderful adventure.
Yeah, my mother and father decided that I was becoming a bit too serious with my first boyfriend. They decided they might show me the world a little, since I hadn't had the private education. I don't know for what reason, but I did okay in the school certificate, and my dad was pretty pleased with me, so I don't know, they organised a Cook's educational tour of Europe, which was...
What's the equivalent now? Is that... It's not like Kentucky, because that's more about drinking and partying.
No, this one had two well supervised, what do you call them, chaperones. But after the end of the 6 weeks, I think we were chaperoning them more than they were chaperoning us, but they were good people. We went from Sydney to Melbourne. I'd used probably my fair share of brown paper bags by the time we got to Perth.
Because this was on a boat, wasn't it?
This was on something that rocks a little.
Oh.
And I found that I wasn't too good a seafarer by then. I just wanted to get off at Melbourne, come home. Mum wouldn't let me. So fortunately she wouldn't let me because she paid for it. So then going up through the Suez Canal, which is now closed to traffic, I think. No boats go through there anymore. Feel very fortunate to have gone through there. Ended up in Malta, then got off the boat in Naples, went all through Europe, saw probably 10, 12 countries, Italy, France, went to Copenhagen for 2 hours, but Italy was the favourite, always will be the favourite.
Why did you like
Beauty,
it so much?
Women's fashions. Brought all my gifts from the monasteries. Brought gifts from my mother and my sisters-in-law and my sister. The brothers didn't get anything. I just realised that. After 50 years, I just realised I didn't bring my brothers anything. Poor brothers. I do love them. No, Italy was beautiful. We saw the Vatican, which blew me away. It was just beautiful. And we'd been there just after the floods in Florence. And we went to Venice. And it was an incredible experience. But when I got home, Mum said, well, unfortunately, the scholarship you've applied for to go to America for 12 months next year, you've just been granted acceptance for the first interview for that. So she said, we don't mean for you to have all this in the 12 months because that is too much for a 16-year-old to have all in one. And that's the way Mum and Dad thought. They were quite conservative and they were worried that it wouldn't do my head any good. But I was very fortunate, and after 4, 5, 6 very tough interviews, I was granted a scholarship to spend my year 12 year in the United States with a beautiful family called the Engelmans. They already had 6 children and a father living in the house, a grandfather living in the house. Very kind-hearted, very similar background to my own parents. They were farmers, very hard-working farmers. I spent 12 months there and did my year 12, and graduated at Miller High School in South Dakota. And then that taught me a lot. It made me speak up for myself because I have been quite shy, but it taught me to believe in myself. And I think that's why Mum had encouraged me to go for that scholarship, because she knew I had to be away from home at 17. I turned 17 when I was over there. So that was an incredible experience. I wouldn't do it again, but I'm glad I did it then. It was hard work,
because of
a
course
lot of study.
You would have gone through those normal teenage stages no matter where you were.
Yeah,
so
but very well looked after.
Yeah.
And I can't remember I was homesick for 3 days when I got there. Just wanted to go home again. But got used to it, and then I just wanted to be planted from South Dakota back to Grenfell. I didn't want any goodbyes anywhere. I didn't want goodbyes on either end. I just wanted to be planted there, but unfortunately you have to learn to cope with goodbyes from a beautiful people in South Dakota.
What do you think people, no matter where they are in a country town, what do you think people do to keep things happy and to stay together that you saw both at home and in South Dakota? Like, what are the similarities?
The similarities were amazing, especially when a panel picks the family for you, and they only have paperwork and a couple of interviews to go on. And they never know the family on the other side except for what that person in South Dakota has said to them and put on paper and sent snail mail in those days to people in Sydney who were picking. But I think I would probably start out by saying that the similarities based on both the farming and a church background. My American family went to church every Sunday. We didn't always go every Sunday in Grenfell, but mostly. But those two things were important, and I was pretty stoked when I got over there, because I'd been a little bit lonely as my brothers and sister were married and I was at home, and it was 14 miles from town, and I didn't belong to many groups except Mum got me into junior farmers in Grenfell, which is where you raise an animal and you write about it and you put it in the Grenfell show and you get no prizes. But anyway, the sheep was nice. And then she encouraged me to be taught flower decorating by a lady at Methodist Church in Grenfell, Mrs. Rolls. And she also taught me how to play organ in church on a Sunday night, which I did from the age of 15 when they needed someone extra. And I remember being very nervous about that because all your parents' friends are in the congregation, and I had Mum up the back holding up her finger, 2 more verses to go, 1 more verse, and I had this mirror, and because in the Grenfell Methodist Church there's a mirror, and I was terrified I'd start playing a 6th verse when I'm only 5, but old Mum saved the day again. Those similarities, and I started playing a lot of music over in America too, and then they taught me singing lessons in the school, became very fond of the choir mistress, and they were brilliant singers in South Dakota because it's very remote and they had to entertain themselves and they have to stick together, they have to look after one another. There's no reason for any family to fight in either Grenfell or South. You have to look after each other, and that's the basis of the bond. And there's a lot less of that these days because it's more electronic and not as socially, physically contact and eye to eye. That's what I...
It also sounds like kids kind of got more involved just doing things in the community as well, like not just for themselves but for other people. Like they went and did stuff for others.
You grow up with that. Even since we've lived here in Currajong Heights, we do... my husband's quite a generous man on a good day, and he does a lot for the neighbours, and 2 neighbours have said to us, "Are you guys from the country?" And that's funny because
that is.
They picked it sort of thing, but you just do it because your parents did it.
Yep.
And some of the things my mother and father did, I didn't know till their funeral. And that...
Like people, what?
Well, the doily over there on the counter was sent from England during World War II by a lady who tracked down Mum and Dad's name because they kept sending her £100 worth of groceries.
So tell the kids how much that is now. What would £100
be? $200 worth. And during the war, Mum and Dad were doing okay because they were on the farm. They were able to eat and survive, but they heard about people in London during the war having nothing. Children were all starving. And at Mum's funeral they stood up and people that knew her said she used to send donations all the time. And boxes, you could send boxes or something apparently. And this doily sits there as no one's allowed to touch it, no one's allowed to wash it except for me. I wash it by hand because some lady in England tracked down Mum's and Dad's name, as I started to say before, and they sent it to her in the mail. So she told me what it was, so then I said, can I have that? When they passed away, can I have that? So that's the generosity of the woman.
Yeah.
And my dad.
I should ask you before we leave Grenfell in our minds as well, just describe to me, if your dad was outside all day with other farm hands and whatnot taking care of what was growing outside, what was your mum's role?
We had shearers because we had a lot of sheep. Mum had to cook for the shearers in the shearing season. She also took full responsibility for running the business and dealing with government requirements, red tape paperwork that had come through. You have to declare how many rabbits you had in your property and how you're going to get rid of them, or else you get a fine of a couple of £100 in those days, which is...
How did she learn all that? How did she learn how to do all that?
Well, she's a bright lady. She was one of the few in the district that went to 5th form. She was also fortunate that my grandmother was a woman of great resourcefulness, and she had a few dollars apparently, and she was able to put Mum through MLC at Burwood. Mum was a boarder as well at MLC Burwood. I'm not sure that she was there for the full 5 years, but I found a clipping in Grandma's Bible when I inherited that from the estate, that there was a clipping in there from Mum's graduation, and it said on the clipping that she was one of the few in the district that had got to 5th form. Again, that was financial, but also Mum was...
she made the most of it.
Yeah, she was pretty smart cookie. And she ran the farm. Dad didn't like paperwork much. He liked to get out there and get busy with it. Mum did the paperwork.
And the shearers had to eat somehow, and whoever was home.
Yeah, Mum used to get nervous because they'd sit out the back room and they'd have the knives and forks upright, and Dad would go out and go crook at them because they were impatient. It had to be 12 noon. So Dad had to come in and say, don't worry, Murray, they can eat when the food's on the table. They'll eat when the food's on the table.
What did she cook?
Roast. A roast or a hot meal a day.
Every single day?
Every single day of the shearing season. Went
I see.
for about 2 or 3 weeks at a time.
So if they were eating on the farm they were working at, were they staying on the farm too?
No,
Where did they stay in town?
they usually came from Young or Grenfell or Cara. So a 20-mile drive, 40-mile drive, or 35-mile drive.
And you've told me before about your first experiences of the Wiradjuri clan, I believe, who...
We found some Aboriginal axes, a little rock stone that's formed into a sharp end. Dad used to bring them home if he ploughed them up, and he'd know what it was.
But he hired some, didn't he? He wasn't, and he kind of wasn't supposed to, or something.
I'm not sure.
He gave them work. Someone told me that.
Yeah, it might have been Uncle Peter. Or
Yeah,
Uncle
maybe.
Bill. I know nothing of that bit, but I just remember the little primitive axes being found.
Oh, that's amazing.
Because he settled that he had 1,000 acres to start with, and then as he got more prosperous, he bought another 500, then a further 500.
Right.
So it ended up being 2,000 acres.
So he'd have to cultivate that, and that because it was virgin land, that's how they were sitting there.
But what he did do was he employed people that he believed needed a hand. One of them was an otherwise alcoholic, a dear sweet man, Jack Donaldson, and he would drink too much on the weekend, and Dad would go into Grenfell and it was freezing cold, and he'd wipe the icicles off Jack's forehead and pick him up out of the grass and cart him home and fill him full of hot soup, and he'd be good for another week. But he wasn't allowed to drink when he lived out at the farm. He didn't live in our house, he lived at an old house up the back. But he was wonderful when he was sober. The next one Dad employed after Jack passed away was an ex-Navy cook, and he needed a job, so Dad gave him a job. He didn't last all that long, he must have done something wrong. So Dad was kind, he used to help people.
Yeah. 1968.
Came back from America in August.
Yep.
And sat around a bit trying to get back into the ways of my real family. And Mum started thinking, I don't think she's going to get off that seat. I think she needs a bit of a stick of dynamite under it. So she said to me, you've got to do something. You're not sitting around here because it's time you went and did a course of some sort.
Is that how she talked?
Not really. That's it. There. That's a translation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just wondering if she had more round vowels or if she had more of a... Was she well spoken?
Yes.
I see.
Yeah.
Oh, of course, because of the background.
Gran wouldn't have accepted anything less.
Of course.
Anyway, so Mum went into... she sent my Year 12 graduation certificate from Miller High School across to ANU. And I actually was accepted into Oriental Studies at the ANU, which I'd had enough of study. I'd studied very hard for the 6 years total.
You've done a fair bit of Oriental studies over your life.
Just as well. Just as well, because I ended up marrying Joseph, who was born in northern China. But Mum then, I said to Mum, I don't want to do a uni course. I've just had enough of books. So then I didn't do anything about it myself. Mum got on the phone and rang Canberra TAFE because we didn't have secretarial staff. I said, I don't want to be a secretary. I don't want to be in an office all my life. But then Mum said, well, this is what you're doing, so you better go do it. So I went over to Canberra TAFE and absolutely loved it. Did shorthand, did psychology, loved that. Typing, wonderful teachers. It was advanced secretarial, and then came top of the class, which just about fainted because I didn't think I did that well. Ended up with a nice £100 cheque. I'm sorry, it would have been $100 cheque because 1966 was decimal currency.
And that was a prize for?
That was a prize from the Business and Professional Women's Association of Canberra for coming first in Canberra TAFE Advanced Secretarial. I followed Ainsley. Ainsley Gotto was a bit of a name. She worked for the Vice Chancellor ANU, Sir John Crawford. She was a bit, I don't know, I think she's a bit of a naughty girl in a day. Anyway, I followed her into the university when she was either sacked or left. And I was the assistant secretary to St John Crawford at ANU for probably about a year, I think, until I got appendicitis and I had to be rushed to hospital. And then Mum got quite seriously ill for a number of reasons, and I decided I would go. I went home to recover from the appendix operation, and then I decided I would get a job closer to home to help look after Mum a bit. And I was a secretary to the local department store in Young, Hammond and Hanlon, and I learned an awful lot in those 3 months. Wonderful boss, taught me a lot about work ethics and how to be a great leader if I ever needed to be, which I never really have been, but he taught me so much. During that time I went against Mum's wishes and applied for a teaching traineeship at Sydney UTS. Ended up being granted that and got the plane from Young Airport to Sydney for an interview for the day. When I got home I was in big trouble.
You got on a plane and your parents didn't know you were on the plane?
I didn't tell them I'd been granted an interview, so I went missing in action for the day, took the plane from Young to Sydney, took the interview and was granted entry to the teacher training program at UTS, which is where you study for 3 days and thrown in the deep end teaching the very first Thursday and Friday of that first week. Got in front of the class and absolutely felt I was on cloud 9. And I knew it was for me because they were all 16, 17-year-olds. They were from Greek and Italian, probably not Maltese over there at Petersham, but Greek and Italian backgrounds. They were very strictly brought up. No one would breathe a word out of place. Ideal teaching situation, so I was very fortunate. Crystal Street TAFE is where I did my 2 days a week.
Which is still there, correct?
Probably, I think it is. I've seen the building.
Yeah.
Loved it.
What is it about teaching? What really hit the high note for you?
I think I got the love of, I think I got it from my father, who was a great teacher with a 5th class education that he had, then to go on to do what he did on the farm. And he brought us up with, he was just a natural teaching person. And we have a lot of teachers in our other relatives, and I think it's just in the blood sometimes. But I'd never do it now. Too much misbehaviour.
Right.
And with keyboarding, you have to be right up with, that's why I still wanted to be in an academic situation, so I ended up being a school assistant for 25 years in the local schools in Hawkesbury.
What do you feel you brought to that job from a teaching background that really was an advantage for you?
When I went for my interview for school assistant, the principal asked me one question which I was able to answer from first-hand experience in that I understood a teacher's role because I worked hard at it when I was teaching. I knew how long their hours could be if they were going to be doing it properly, how much marking was involved, preparing of programs and lessons after hours. So when I went into the interview for my permanent position at Windsor High School, he said exactly what you said actually just now. What do you think you can give to this job if I grant you this job? And I said, well, the original name for a school assistant was teacher's aide. You're there to aid the teachers. And I've been a teacher, and so I understand both sides, and that's where I think I can fit in.
And you were going back to work after
17 years, a very blessed 17 years, because my husband's a very hard worker. I was able to stay at home for the first 17 years to raise a family, which has been very valuable, probably to them, certainly was for me as best years of my life.
Mm.
Among the best years of my life, yeah.
And you were still in teacher training when you met someone at a blind date at a Masonic Lodge ball.
Yeah, I was just finishing that year. And Joe had lost his mother in the previous October. I think it was about the August. No, it was about September of the following year after he lost his mother. He was having he'd built a new home, and he was putting curtains in it. The lady who was making the curtains, her husband sat next to me at teacher training, because we were all in teacher training. We were thrown together with carpentry teachers, with art teachers. It was a wonderful class, full of everybody from all walks of life. Very good. And so the guy sitting next to me, he said, "Oh, my wife's making curtains for this Chinese dude." And he's really lonely. Every time she goes there to make curtains, she cries because he misses his mother. He needs a wife. And we've got this ball coming up in 2 weeks' time. I said, "Well, I'd love to dance. Can he dance?" And he goes, "I don't know, I'll ask him." So we went to the ball. We nearly both pulled out. And it was lovely. He was very sweet, extremely good looking, and all dressed up in a suit. I mean, who could resist him? So
what went through your mind, though? Surely with White Australia really recent in our history.
No. My parents used to have exchange students. They had the Mormon basketball team stay over. They billeted everybody because Dad couldn't travel. He suffered my thing of seasick, car sick, bus sick, train sick, submarine sick.
So not strong on the inner ears.
Not a contender for space travel, no. So he had that. He couldn't go anywhere. So what he did, in order to make us accepting of every race and every creed, he would, I don't know whether Mum was so keen, anyway, she cooked for everyone, but Dad was the one that said, "I want to see people, I love people. Murray, can you put on a pot of stew? I've just invited the Mormon basketball team to come stay for 2 nights." And Mum would freak out, but she got used to it after a while. And
this is
then
so
we had
interesting,
exchange
though.
students.
Your dad was so, he was really kind of rigid in some ways, but this is like another side.
He was very social.
Yeah.
He loved to chat. But the thing about, people have said about my dad for years before and since, that he was a good talker, but he was a very good listener.
Huh.
Very hard combination to come by.
Yeah.
So anyway, when I first brought Joe home to meet my parents, actually they beat him to it. I think they came whizzing down to Sydney before I had a chance to cart him to Grenfell. I remember him saying to my father, "What do you think about me being Chinese?" And Dad said, "Well, I've done all this work to get my children to be accepting of all nationalities. How can I now turn around and double take and say, you can't marry someone from another culture?" I would be so two-faced if I did that. And I remember him and Mum both saying that. But Mum thought he was Alaskan. She wasn't sure what he was. And that's the standard joke, and Joe can laugh about that now.
Yeah.
I don't know about the time, but
Right.
she just came out and said, "You're from Alaska?" Oh, yeah. You don't look Chinese, because we'd only come across Cantonese in the Chinese shop in Grenfell, takeaway.
Of course.
And Mum and Dad were, as it happened long before that, were friendly with Northern Chinese people that owned a fruit shop and a dress shop in Young.
Oh.
And they were actually white Russians, but they spoke Mandarin.
I see.
So they were accepting and familiar with the culture.
So your family was. So how did the community around you then go once you started appearing elsewhere together? Or if the community came into your home for one of the many things that you had on?
Oh, some of them, it's just the same as now. You know, percentage of people will always be either racist or bigoted. You can't change that. But they wouldn't dare do that in front of Mum and Dad. No, because
Because they had status. Yeah.
They were very well respected, Mum and Dad.
Yeah. How did you become engaged? Was it romantic?
Oh yes, reasonably so. Yeah, I had to eat raw shellfish. And never seen an oyster in my life. So I went to a little place at Manly. You used to walk down a little bridge, and that was just below, as it happened, where we'd been on family holidays for about 11 years straight. So it was familiar to me. That's where I wanted to eat. I wanted to go there and see what they... Because we never ate there as a family when I went on holidays there with my folks, because it was too expensive.
You're doing an adult thing.
No, well, I thought I'd just ask this. He looked like he was fairly well off. He might be able to afford to take me there after all these years and see what's inside that fancy restaurant. So I sucked him in well and truly. So I had my oysters, but I demanded that they be cooked. So we had the Kilpatrick version.
No.
Actually, I've never eaten it since.
Love it.
Since.
I must have Dad's.
If it's not a lamb chop, it's just not part of it. Anyway, so then the next day went into Sydney and picked out a most beautiful diamond ring. And he pretended he was a jeweller, and he asked for the man's eyeglass. And he Joe truly looked like a jeweller when he looked at that diamond. He had me convinced, because he does sell cars for a living, let's remember that. But the jeweller was so terrified, and he beat him down. It was the first time I'd seen anything like it, beating down a price, but he got him down a few $100s.
Pretty decent rock too, worth bargaining on.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that was good, yeah. And then Mum and Dad came down, we all went out to dinner. Then Mum sent Bill and Gillian down. Bill was married to Gillian by then. Next day, Mum must have phoned Bill to hightail it down there with Gillian to see, because Joe already built a house that he lived with his mother there, and Bill and Gillian came down, so Joe had to rush out and buy chopsticks because buy cutlery because he only had chopsticks and bowls. And then the next couple of weeks, Mum sent Peter and Helen down, my older brother and his beautiful wife Helen, down to have a look at this new boy on the landscape. So they must have gone home and reported to Mother. So yeah, all worked out okay. Yeah, I was very, very truly blessed. I had a husband and a brand new little home, and I didn't have to go to work for the next 17 years. I keep saying that, is it important? Because my children had a bit of a grounding, not having daycare or that as such, as the young people must do these days. And I feel sad for them because I was lucky.
So in 1973, also a great year for music, you moved from Moorebank to Castle Hill.
Yes, I moved from Moorebank to Castle Hill. We lived next door to Joe's brother and his wife and 4 children. Relationship didn't benefit by us being next door. That's sort of a nice way to put it. And so we decided our relationship might benefit from being further away. So we found a nice place at Castle Hill that was a spec home, fully finished just about, with lots of space for a growing family. I always wanted 4 children. That was my aim in life, to have 4 children. And I knew I could fit them in there. And I knew that the garden was a blank canvas for Joe. And so we were very happily settled there. It was a beautiful place to live. It wasn't too structurally well built, we found out later, so we thought, well, eventually we'll have to move somewhere else out on the advice of a builder. But we had 15 years there, I think it was. I think that's about it. I might be wrong there. Moved to Wilberforce on 7 acres.
Why?
When my parents had passed away by then. Both parents had passed away, and I was generously left a little bit of money that I could go out to acreage so my girls could have a horse. before they got too old to be interested in that sort of thing, and I wanted to give them a more grounded experience from the country experience I had. Was I consider quite grounded.
Mm.
And in the city you can be swallowed up by too many kids in the high school, feel pressured by a lot of competition, where I knew they had it in them to be more open-minded and to develop their interests in the outdoors, breathe a bit of fresh air. Castle Hill became very crowded as well. It took me an hour to get up to the shops, which were only 3 blocks away. One Easter, just before Easter, and then before Mother's Day and before Christmas.
No.
And I couldn't bear...
That was only, what,
traffic.
2 kilometres or something, 2 or 3
Less than
kilometres.
that. It was so crowded.
Nope.
And it was it's still a beautiful suburb, but it was no longer my chosen place of residence. It's just people were getting less considerate of others. They were becoming more involved with themselves. More and more mansions being built. And I had a lovely time there because a lot of us girls weren't working then. It didn't seem the requirement. We were able to stay home with the family, and it was a wonderful time.
The requirement by whom?
Within ourselves, I guess, and within the peer group. You felt peer pressure in your 20s and 30s, as still 20s and 30s still do now, but I decided that I didn't want to be that sort of person. I didn't want to have to spend 2 hours in the car just to get a bottle of milk. It's just not
what do you feel...
I don't like traffic. Still don't like traffic. That's why we live up here.
Yeah.
Except for the river.
You had all those years at home with kids. What do you feel you've gifted those 4 children with as a result of being home with them so much?
I never really wanted to give them. It was about me. I liked having them around. So it was a selfish thing to start with, and then after a while, by the time you get to number 4 and you have to send her off to be cared for at 3.5, that's when I realised how fortunate I was not having to do that, because I originally only went back to work because I'm thinking the commission structure of my husband's wages was going down and down. Each 4 or 5 years it'd go less and less, and in 1972 it was a wonderful wage, but by the time Melinda was born in 1986, the commission structure had gone down as low as $30 a car, and he might have spent 2.5 weeks with one family, and to get $30 for hours of work, and after hours meetings that still turned out with no sale. It was just too difficult. I think I got offered a chance to go to work in a school for 2 weeks to fill in for someone that was considering being on secondment to the department in another area at Blacktown education system. A friend rang me and said, "What's your typing like?" I said, "Oh, I'm all right. I haven't typed for 17 years, but I'll give it a go." Went in for 2 weeks and I stayed 13 years in that school. Figured I must have been doing the right thing some of the time. Then I transferred up to somewhere closer to home, to Hawkesbury High School, and was there for, I don't know, probably it's total 24 years, so the maths has never been great, so, you know, the rest of the time was at Hawkesbury.
But your English is rather spot on.
I enjoyed my spelling, so I enjoyed the last couple of years in particular at Hawkesbury High, when the principal was a couple of principals are very good to me, gave me a lot of chance to learn new software, and I really went back to work to replace the appliances, and I ended up being glad I was there because it helped me learn how to work a computer. And then, as I started to say, the couple of principals gave me a lot of chances of learning to introduce the card identity system at Windsor High. I was solely responsible for that, and it really got the grey matter going. And then I became quite self-confident that, I can do this, whereas I never thought in a million years I'd ever. When I first went back to work after 17 years with domestic goddesses,
it must have been such an
the
adjustment.
photocopier scared me to death. The first time the paper started spitting out, I nearly passed out. So at Windsor High, I was truly blessed with beautiful teachers. Not so obviously, yeah, okay, but they were busy. But some of the teachers there came down and helped me those first few weeks. And one in particular was Chris Walsh, who was the sports teacher, head teacher. And I'm forever grateful to her. I enjoyed it because you end up, the teachers come in. When I was in the print room at Windsor High School, to start with for 3 years, I was in the print room. And I used to come home and say to my husband, I think I should put a plaque on the outside of that door saying, counsellors to teaching staff, 9 till 3, no charge. Because they'd come in with all of their problems and you knew you had to be, it was a sense of confidentiality. You had all of these stories in your heart as you drove home. But I felt like it was useful.
Yeah.
But getting back to the legacy of giving to your children for being home, I just wish that young parents these days could be there every afternoon when their children get home, but it's no longer financially possible. It's just no longer possible for the majority of people to do that. And I'm just feeling really happy that I was able to do that. I enjoyed having junk food ready from the oven in the afternoon when they got home from school. I enjoyed being there because my mother was only ever away at 3 o'clock when I got home from school, once in my school life, once, and I went crook on her. And she said, look here, young Heather, you really do have to get used to the fact that in your life ahead it probably won't be like this. So one day in 13 years of schooling that I was at a Red Cross meeting late, you'll have to just put up with it. And I thought, probably I do.
Yeah.
But, you know, I was truly very fortunate that Mum didn't have to work outside the home. A lot of women even at that time did have to. So,
what advice might you have for young parents starting a family? Or what do you think society needs to remember about raising a family that they could maybe take from your generation? That maybe we're losing.
Well, there are not very few books written on it, and when you're a parent, you haven't got really a lot of time to read books on how to raise a family. It's, gosh, I would just say patience, be organised, be prepared to accept that menial tasks will be with you forever. Am I off the point? What do you think?
You tell us. You tell us what to do, because you were pretty darn good at it.
Oh, I don't think so. I feel like I wasn't. But funny thing about, you know, a lot of young people growing up now would think that they wouldn't be any good with children. They weren't keen on other people's children, because I was the youngest of the family, as I said before, and I had a lot of times I had to help my sister with her twins and a 20-month-old all at the same time. In school holidays, I was sent over to Canberra to help her in the holidays because she was very capable, but she was snowed under. And I started thinking, oh, children. Oh, no, I don't think so.
And how old were you at this time?
15.
Yeah.
16. 14, 15, 16.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think you've just got to... Once I had Peter and then Karen, then Ros and then Melinda, my 4 that I always aim for, I think it just is in you to, every time you have a child, you have to explain to the next one that when they're jealous, you grew a bag full of love for them in that pregnancy, so that is separate from this one who thinks they got less or what. You've got to always remember, I read it once a long time ago, when I did have time to read a sentence here and there, that the mother said to their jealous sibling, I grew this amount of love when I was growing you. And you've got to make them feel important on their own ground, on their own space.
Yeah.
They're all different. And that's another sentence that came from my American host mother in 1968. Because I went over there and they were all high achievers. And I was at that time very shy. I'm still quite shy. And I think she said to me, the second week I lived with them in South Dakota, the oldest daughter was only 10 months older than me at the time, and she was a very high achiever. She came like A+ average in every subject. She also won Miss South Dakota 1968 because of her horse riding and her Hereford raising and her everything.
Yeah.
And I started thinking, I can never measure up. And host mother Leona sat me down on the couch. She put her arm around me. She said, "You are you. Maletta is Maletta. Connie is Connie. Chris is Chris. And down the line to the other children. You are special because you are here, because you were chosen to be. We're lucky to have you. Never feel that. You know, I've never forgotten that. And I think that's the lesson to be taught to each of your children.
Yeah.
And then when they muck up on you, you've got to be patient, because nothing is to be gained from them taking off thinking they're unloved. So, you know, and it's happened in our family, and so I've got first-hand experience. So I could write a book on it, but we're all good. We're all good to go.
So when did you decide to retire?
I decided to retire a couple of years early because eldest daughter and son-in-law were having a very tough time. Son-in-law had lost his job. They gave birth, Karen actually gave birth to Heidi with 2 holes in Heidi's heart. And so I didn't want her going to daycare. With germs, she could have caught something that could have got into her system. And they'd had some trouble trying to have a child, so I just wanted to mind her myself. And I thought, well, if she gets pneumonia through something I've done, then I know that I've done my best. So I retired early to mind her full time. And then she got through that 2 years without having any surgery. And so the day that decision was made, Karen and I were both present with Heidi at the specialist. And he was nearly in tears. He was so happy that he didn't have to. And he just stamped the file as an archive. And Karen and I had a good howl outside. And we wheeled Heidi home, very proud of what had happened. So then my retirement went from there. Then the funny part about it is you always say to people, don't retire because you get sick all the time, because you've never got time to get sick when you're working. But I seemed to get a few ills and things after that, but that was always refreshed by the gift of grandchildren. We have 10 grandchildren, 9 blood grandchildren, and 1 that we accept as our own through our relationship of Rosalind and her beautiful stepdaughter Alexandra, and so she's number 10, and I've got great pleasure in minding them when I'm up to it, and love to see them go home again because I'm tired, but love having them, and they're just a true blessing to me. They're all healthy, they all have all of their limbs, they have a bright mind on them, they're all ready for university. Even when Flynn's 1 and Thomas is now selling cars at nearly 19, I'm so proud of all of them.
You've been a grandma since 90.
I was 50. Peter and Julie did their best to get me a grandma before I was 50, and I think I just about made it. So Thomas then ended up in the car game, which was a great joy to his grandfather, my husband Joe. He's absolutely stoked. He started another piece of machinery, which is part of our life, so we might leave that bit in.
Yeah, maybe.
Joe likes a lot of noise. And I think he's vacuuming Rosalind's car as we speak. But no, my grandchildren are my absolute joy.
Yeah.
And you don't have to be fully responsible. You can just ring the mum and say, get them out of here, I've had enough. And
my next question was going to be, what are the joys that grandparenting brings that's really different to parenting?
Well, you can give them a Mars bar behind their mother's back. You can send them off to a nap with a small packet of Smarties. Shh, don't tell anybody this. You can let them make a mess on the floor because you now have a wooden floor and not carpet, or it's different rules. And then when the children say to me, but we weren't allowed to do that, I go, well, it's different. It's a different relationship and I'm allowed. And even Joe has mellowed to a reasonable degree with children making noise or mess. He still doesn't cope too well, but he's mellowed a lot, I believe. No, it's just a beautiful thing. Especially having such a diversity in age groups. I always say to people that ask me, how many grandchildren you've got? I say, well, I've got 4 under 4, and the year is 2017. I've still got 4 under 4, and I've got 6. Alexandra is 13 or something, so I've got 6 above 13. And it's very special because you have all the little bits all over again, but you can still see them. Chelsea with her love of working at McDonald's and her her beautiful singing voice. You've got Liesl with her love of homework, which I could never understand, does the maths first. And I love teaching her piano just at the moment for a little bit longer. I see Sal with her love of the flute, and she and Manning both play in the Millennium Band for the Department of Education, which is a huge amount of work, and that brings in the music. And then you've got little Jamie, who is very black and white, and who I just get along with well because I'm black and white in my opinions. You say, Jamie, would you like a sandwich? No. Would you like to go outside on the swing? Yes. And you say, have you had enough on the swing? No. So, you know where you stand. And then with Heidi, it's like on-off switch. She's full-on hilarious, especially in casualty at Hawkesbury Hospital when she brings the house down when she's sick. Everybody laughs at her jokes. And Tom with his car sales, you know. Alexandra, we don't see much of, but even her mother says she likes me as a spare mother sometimes, and that to me is very special. Have I missed anybody? Who have I missed, Rose?
I think you got around everybody.
I got around everybody, didn't I?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. So,
Can we talk about what it was like to be diagnosed with cancer?
It was the scariest thing. It was scary. But I was in a surreal situation for about half a day, and then when I got home, and I hadn't even let my husband know yet because I like face-to-face with things like that. I don't like phone calls to people. I like to speak to them. But when I got home that day, someone from Karen's church had already had to been $100 worth of white flowers and landed them on my front doorstep. And Karen had put it on Facebook or somewhere, and someone had found out. So that started me off on a really good note, even that first day. But it was a shock. Then my children were all extremely supportive, which got me through that first 10 hours. Didn't sleep for a couple of nights, thinking this is it. I've had a couple of chances at life, being transfused at birth, not expected to live, and then a few other situations where you get a fright, either in a near car accident or something as a teenager or whatever, and it was frightening. But then the diagnosis was made that it was only early stages. I got onto a great doctor. And then,
what kind of cancer was it?
It was uterine cancer. It was the size of a golf ball. When I had the situation where I had to have a hysterectomy, Rosalind rang me and said, well, you've got what you want. You don't need any more kids, so let's get rid of it. And I thought, well, that's really another black and white answer that I really appreciated, because it put it in, and I didn't mind all of that because I had my family. Some people never live even to that age, let alone survive cancer. I didn't have to have chemo. It was all clear and still is clear.
What would you say is...
I was very lucky.
Seeing how prevalent cancer is in the community, what would you say is the best way that someone can support a loved one when they have a new cancer diagnosis? What's something they can do?
Just don't be afraid to say something.
Yeah.
Just don't disappear and be too afraid. It's not about you, it's about the person with the ailment. And that's the same with any visit to hospital. It's not about you. Check with the person whether they want to talk about it. If they don't, fair enough. But say something.
Yeah.
And I've met a few really decent friends that I still adore to this day. One of them had lost a baby full term and still had to give birth to it, knowing the little girl had died. When I was asked to go to her house when I was 24 years old, because I was part of a caring committee at Castle Hill Uniting Church at the time, and I said to the leader, I can't do that. What will I say? She said, don't say anything. Make a cake, go to her door and give her a hug. Now, I've known Jeanette for, Karen, I've known her for 43 years and we still ring one another once a month, and she lives out of Sydney now. That's how I met her. So sometimes by having the guts to say something, but don't disappear and not know what to say. Remember, it's not about you. It's about the other person. And I learned that also from my son-in-law, Brad. He said to me once, you go to hospitals, it's not about the visitor. It's about the person in the bed. Think about them first. Go, but don't think it's about you visiting. It's about the person in the bed.
Something you wrote recently was, my husband says I've always loved cats so much that I've adopted some of their traits, such as surviving twice at birth, surviving cancer, the bad knee, kidney disease, you can see in the dark, and you love tuna. That's a pretty full life.
He thinks I'm related to cats because I'm heading from a 9th life. Not really, I'm a long way off 9 lives yet, but
yeah.
I take a lesson from my brother, who is actually very seriously ill with lymphoma and bone marrow cancer at the moment, and his spirit has been enormous.
Yeah.
So I can't be anything less because I'm still sweeting underneath the char. Been a char a long time, nearly 46 years. I was only a sweeting for 21, but the sweeting spirit is still in there. And it's a good spirit to follow, as my older brother is given the example of, and loaded a truckload of cattle the other week on the day that he had to then go and have everything done to him, a chemo the next day, and etc. And the doctor said, you should never have been doing that. And he said, that's the sweeting spirit. That's why I've survived this long, Doc. So you have to remember those things. Fight on. Don't let it get you.
What's been the theme of your life, you think?
Family. Family's important. The career was a career. A career was a job to me. And as I've said, to replace things that were expensive and thinking, a few holidays here and there, eventually we'll do that. Just the family, the children are my life. Grandchildren are my very special second life. Retirement has been full of a few interesting challenges, but love being allowed to go to town on a weekday and not feel like you're truanting from the school office.
What would you say to someone...
But I did love my job too.
Yeah.
Love being a spare mum,
Yeah.
spare auntie to kids with unfortunate backgrounds that I never had to experience.
Okay.
Really, that was the highlight of my working career. And for them to come up to me in the street now in Windsor or Richmond or even Penrith and say, hey miss, how you doing? And they're there now as 45-year-olds with a bunch of children and a cheery little wife, and it just, I think they'd even bother to remember me.
Yeah.
I'm choked with that, really choked up with that. Yeah, just feel really happy to be born in the 50s and then to have the experience of a peaceful country as the world stands this week with Trump and the little Korean boy with a bad haircut having a big row. 2 mental cases together. I'm worried for my grandchildren. I look at little Flynn, who's 1, And I look at Tom, who's 18, as I've said before, and all of those in between, and what the life that their parents must worry that they're going to have to face. Nowhere near as fortunate as Grandma. I wish all my grandchildren could have been brought up on the farm of Grenfell and to experience the wholesomeness of that time without the interruption of, as much as the internet and technology is wonderful, it can be difficult to focus on what's truly important and to lose contact with the social graces of please and thank you. Not my grandchildren, they're all perfect, but most kids have so much else to contend with. I couldn't have done it. I couldn't raise children in this day and age. I couldn't do it. It would be mind-boggling. So, yeah. Yeah.
So you've been retired now for about 4 years-ish?
Yes, yeah.
Retirement can be an incredibly difficult time for some people who have had a really hard and fast career or just have trouble adjusting to huge changes, full stop. So I was just wondering, now that you've been retired for several years, you might have advice to share with someone who is thinking about retirement, planning for it, or has just retired and might be finding that adjustment difficult. What would you say to them about the mentality that might be helpful for them, or, you know, helpful things they could be doing to ease into that transition?
Well, I think for everything, as in everything in life, you need to be a little bit prepared for it if you can. And during my time with Heidi for the 2 years on my own in the house with her, I had time to adjust to it. So I was still working for my daughter and son-in-law, and I was busy. So I think taking from that, you need a plan. You need a plan for your rest time, especially if you're both retired together, which not everybody does. It's turned out that we've been retired together, Joe and I. So you have to plan for mentally prepare for what it's like not to have as much time for yourself. You have to then make sure you get enough time for yourself. You also have to plan financially, put away as much as you can beforehand if it's at all possible, because you forget that your home, or say you're using your facilities at home, so your power is going to be higher than perhaps you would have anticipated. You're eating at home more, so you've got more meals to prepare. You might have 3 meals and 2 coffees to get each day, or those things aren't always something that you think about before you retire. But it's not all has to be planned for, but I would suggest that you give some thought to the fact that you look into, once you're 60, if you're 65 when you retire, you're entitled to a lot of seniors things. There was a statistic that I learnt on Saturday at a church event I attended with a friend, that there are 3 times more businesses now than were so in 2015 that offer seniors discounts in a lot of different stores. Not just Macca's coffee, not just the standard things with a seniors card, but you can get discounts. Don't forget, you can get discounts on your power. You can get, probably, if you haven't owned a home, you can probably get rent assistance. And lots of those things. Go to your library, get your seniors newspaper, read it from front to back every month. I think they're monthly publications, if I'm not wrong. I've learned a lot from that. I don't like reading much. I passed school without ever reading a novel, but don't tell anybody that. But now I've learned to read, either on the net or in publications. Yeah, just be mentally prepared. Get a project. What we do is we get a project. Each week make a plan. I've always been writing down this person, because it does you good apparently to cross it off as you do it. So I still do that, even as I did in the office. I've always done it, even from when I wasn't working. So, I mean, just little things can make a big difference But enjoy your free time. You've earned it. You've worked hard for it. And don't think that you don't deserve some relaxation time. Plan your relaxation time if you have to. Speak to people your own age that have similar situations as well. Don't just all accept ageism. That often happens when you let your hair go grey. I've noticed that. They'll see you on a pedestrian crossing, the young ones, and often hit the accelerator. Sometimes, other times you'll get some respect. But ageism has become a bit of a problem. And Noni Hazelhurst, the well-known play school presenter, has done a big project on the way she's been treated since she got older, and I have to get hold of that. So things like that, make yourself, get some knowledge about it, and do your homework, but relax and enjoy your freedom.